Imagine for a second that it's 3 in the morning.
Okay.
You're the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company, but you are not in some cushy penthouse suite.
Right, definitely not.
No, you are physically sleeping under your desk on a concrete factory floor.
Just breathing in all that industrial dust.
Exactly. Because your production line is failing and you just absolutely refuse to leave until the output numbers hit the target.
No committees, no HR seminars on work-life balance.
None of it. Just raw, unapologetic, obsessive execution.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are engineering this custom-tailored analysis specifically for you today, and we are going to get into some incredibly heavy, highly controversial lifting.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But before we strike the match on today's topic, I need to ask you directly to like and subscribe to the show right now.
Please do.
Your support is honestly the only thing that lets us tackle the kind of, polarizing, unfiltered content we're diving into today.
It really is.
And today's deep dive is exactly that. It's an exclusive, ultra-long, totally fascinating review of this highly provocative new ebook.
I mean, it is without a doubt one of the most aggressive, just unflinching texts we have ever unpacked on this show.
Truly.
The arguments presented here, they do not ask for permission,
Yeah.
and they certainly do not apologize for anything.
That is an understatement.
Okay.
So we're looking at Conrad Reicher's 2025 ebook, Business Cycles, a deep dive into economic ups and downs.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be completely upfront with you, the listener, about who this book is actually written for. Because Reicher himself is, explicitly clear about his target demographic.
He does not hide it at all.
Not even a little bit. This is a book written directly for men's rights activists, the red-pilled manosphere, and, men who feel just entirely alienated by modern corporate and economic culture.
Right.
If you want to understand the history of our economic and cultural institutions, specifically examining how they operated before what Reicher describes as their total capture by feminist and Marxist ideologies, this is the text.
It's the blueprint for that specific worldview.
And I want to tell you right out of the gate, you should absolutely hook yourself up with a copy.
Yeah, definitely read it for yourself.
Check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book, and make sure to follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack.
Now, before we open chapter 1 and dive into the actual mechanics of his thesis, it is absolutely crucial that we establish the ground rules for this deep dive.
Oh yeah, we need the disclaimer.
We really do. The source material we are working with today contains highly politically charged, deeply polarizing, and just aggressively uncompromising content.
Yeah, he takes no prisoners.
He doesn't. He takes direct aim at modern social movements, financial institutions, global policies, modern gender dynamics, all of it.
Everything.
So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that neither of us here is taking a side.
Right.
We are not endorsing, nor are we condemning the viewpoints of the author. We are entirely neutral arbiters today.
Exactly. We are a blank slate. I mean, our job isn't to tell you if Reicher is right or wrong.
Precisely. The mission of this deep dive is purely to unpack, impartially report on, and just deeply analyze the arguments and the data he presents.
We're basically acting as a mirror to the source material.
Yes, exactly a mirror, so that you can fully understand Reicher's worldview, the underlying logic of his arguments, and the historical data he leverages to support this overarching thesis.
Right. We are here to look at the why and the how behind his claims, just breaking down the mechanisms of his thought process.
So let's jump right into the fire.
Let's do it. Because Reicher, he does not believe in easing the reader in.
No, he kicks the doors right off the hinges in the opening chapter.
He introduces this overarching theme of the dynamo of industry. He argues that civilization itself is built through unapologetic masculine urgency.
Yeah.
And his core opening argument revolves around this single, highly aggressive quote. He says, "Weakness is a spreadsheet error."
It's such a striking foundational thesis, and it sets the mechanical baseline for everything else in the book.
It really does.
He's essentially arguing that the very foundation of industrial, technological, and economic success is biologically and philosophically incompatible with modern notions of work-life balance.
Or consensus building, right?
Exactly, or corporate empathy.
Yeah.
In Riker's view, you just cannot build an empire and simultaneously worry about whether everyone feels emotionally supported.
Right, and he backs this up by highlighting some incredibly wild examples of raw, obsessive execution.
Yeah, the historical stuff.
Yeah, this goes back to the scenario I mentioned at the top of the show. He talks about Elon Musk literally sleeping under his desk at the Tesla Fremont plant during the Model 3 production hell.
Just living on the factory floor.
Yeah, and Riker points out that this wasn't just some PR stunt to look busy. Tesla's output surged 63% that specific quarter because the leader of the company was physically acting as the bottleneck.
Right, forcing decisions by the minute.
Exactly. And he also brings up Steve Jobs' 1984 Macintosh team.
Oh, that story's crazy.
Right. These were guys working 90-hour weeks, fueled by amphetamines and Jolt Cola, basically treating sleep like a debt paid to weakness.
That's his phrase, yeah. And my favorite example is Akio Morita, the founder of Sony.
Oh man, the sledgehammer.
Yes. Riker describes how Morita would literally walk the factory floor and smash defective radios with a sledgehammer to enforce absolute uncompromising perfection.
Just shattering them right in front of the line workers.
Right. But what's vital to understand here is how Riker uses these specific historical anecdotes to construct a broader evolutionary and economic mechanism.
Right. He isn't just telling fun stories about crazy CEOs.
No, not at all. He's proposing that historical empires and megacorporations were never built by committee.
They weren't built by democratic consensus.
Right, they weren't built by polling focus groups, and they certainly weren't built by human resources departments debating psychological safety.
God, no.
They were forged by men who prioritized relentless, often brutal action over the approval of their peers.
Right. He is drawing a direct causal line between hyper-aggressive, uncompromising male behavior and the creation of tangible, lasting economic value.
And he brings some heavy historical data to try and prove this correlation.
Yeah, let's talk about the Japan post-World War II data.
It's fascinating.
Think about this. In 1955, Japan's GDP was growing at a staggering 9.4% annually.
Which is just an insane number.
Right. And they sustained this hypergrowth for nearly 2 decades, effectively building a $5 trillion economy from the atomic ash of the war.
And Riker is very quick to point out the exact sociological conditions of that miracle.
Yep. He notes it happened with precisely 0 female executives at the Bank of Japan.
None.
It was driven by what he calls the salaryman ethos. Toyota engineers pulling 120-hour weeks, sleeping on factory floors, completely sacrificing their personal lives to aggressively outcompete Detroit automakers.
You know, if we look at the mechanics of why Riker is highlighting this specific era, it's because he's deliberately establishing a contrast.
Right, setting up the juxtaposition.
Exactly. He takes this post-war salaryman ethos, this singular, hyper-focused obsession with industrial output, and juxtaposes it against modern corporate mandates.
The alphabet soup.
Yeah, specifically E.S.G, which is environmental, social, and governance, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
Riker views these modern frameworks not as a progressive evolution of corporate maturity, but as a mechanical infection that causes institutional decay.
And he uses Germany as the ultimate cautionary tale for what happens when you introduce that decay. Right?
She does.
Riker points out that in 2022, Germany mandated 30% female board quotas for their top companies. And according to the data he cites, this mandate was followed by an 18% productivity drop in their DAX.
Right.
And just really quickly for the listener, the DAX is basically the German equivalent of the Dow Jones. You know, it tracks the 40 major German blue chip companies.
Right, the big industrial players.
So Riker looks at this and calls it chasing balance with gender quotas in one hand and bankruptcy notices in the other.
It's a very vivid image.
It is, but I need you to help me understand the actual mechanism here. Like, how does a quota actually cause a drop in productivity according to his logic?
Right, it's a good question.
And how does he connect that to Jeff Bezos' famous 2 pizza rule? You know, the idea that if a team can't be fed with 2 pizzas, it's too big.
Right.
Because Riker praises Amazon's one-click ordering being launched with just 3 engineers and 0 focus groups. But how exactly does he connect small team dynamics at a tech company to his broader, almost biological argument about male risk tolerance?
Well, this is where Riker's argument bridges modern management theory with actual endocrinology.
Okay.
To answer your first question about the DAX, Riker argues that when you mandate board seats based on a quota, rather than aggressive meritocratic competition, you instantly change the psychology of the boardroom.
Because the goal changes.
Exactly. The focus shifts mechanically from how do we dominate this market at all costs to how do we ensure we are compliant and balanced.
Ah, I see.
He argues that compliance is inherently risk-averse, while growth requires massive risk. And that brings us to the biology of the two-pizza rule.
Right, the Amazon thing.
Riker cites this fascinating study from the Journal of Finance detailing human hormonal cycles. The study shows that men's risk tolerance spikes by 34% during high testosterone phases.
34%. That's huge.
It is. And this typically occurs right around 10 a.m., following the morning drop in cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
Wait. So he's literally tying market behavior to morning hormone levels.
Exactly. Riker argues that male-led firms, historically, intuitively capitalize on these biological rhythms.
That is wild.
By keeping teams incredibly small, highly concentrated, and fiercely competitive, like with Bezos' two-pizza rule, they remove the bureaucratic friction that would otherwise dilute this natural biological appetite for risk.
Okay, think of it like this. If you have a small hunting party of 3 guys tracking an animal, they can pivot instantly, take a risky shot, and move fast.
Right, completely agile.
But if you try to hunt with a town hall committee of 30 people, everyone is arguing about the ethical implications of the hunt, the noise scares the animal away, and everyone goes hungry.
That is precisely the analogy Riker is making.
Yeah.
He argues that they treat market risk as a blood sport.
A blood sport?
Yeah. He tracked 20,000 trading records and claims that male-led firms making aggressive moves during these peak testosterone hours outperform cautious competitors by 18% in annualized returns.
Oh, wow.
So, in Riker's framework, Bezos' two-pizza rule isn't just about administrative efficiency or, saving money on meetings.
Right.
It's about isolating and weaponizing biological male urgency. He argues that large committees inherently default to caution, compromise, and safety, which he broadly associates with feminine traits.
Well, the small groups swing for the fences.
Exactly. Small, male-dominated groups default to aggression and asymmetric risk, which he claims is the actual mechanical engine of capitalism.
Okay, so if we follow this logical through line, if Riker believes that modern industry has been softened, neutered by committees, HR departments, and board quotas, how does he view the actual lifeblood of those industries?
The money itself.
Exactly. If the companies are soft, what about the money that funds them? Because that leads us directly into his blistering multi-chapter critique of central banks and fiat currency.
It does, and this is where his critique scales up from corporate culture to systemic global macroeconomics.
Oh, he goes completely scorched earth on the Federal Reserve.
He really does.
He calls them the DMV of finance.
Which is pretty funny, honestly.
It is. And he introduces this phrase, moral hazard feminism. He is absolutely ruthless in his breakdown of the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh yeah, the bailout section.
Right. He looks at the mechanics of the bailouts and recounts how Lehman Brothers CEO Dick Fuld walked away with $484 million in compensation while the middle class lost their pensions, their homes, and their jobs. Riker looks at this mechanic and says, this isn't capitalism. True capitalism demands failure. If you take a bad risk, you must be destroyed by it.
Yes.
He sees the Fed's bailout stepping in to act as a safety net for reckless bankers as a rigged carnival game that removes the Darwinian threat of failure.
To fully grasp Riker's perspective here, we have to examine his historical lens on inflation and what fiat currency actually is.
Okay, lay it out for us.
He traces what he calls the original sin of modern economics back to a specific event, the 1971 Nixon shock.
Oh, all right.
This was the exact moment the United States government unpegged the US dollar from the gold standard.
So let's explain what that actually meant mechanistically for the listener who might not be a monetary historian.
Good idea.
Before 1971, if you had a US dollar, it represented a physical claim on a set amount of actual gold held in a vault somewhere.
Right, there was a physical constraint on how much money the government could print.
But Nixon closed that gold window.
Correct.
Right.
By unshackling the currency from a physical commodity, the dollar became a fiat currency.
Meaning?
Meaning it has value simply because the government mandates that it does, and they can print an infinite amount of it.
Just out of thin air.
Exactly. Since that 1971 decision, Riker points out, the US dollar has lost roughly 85% of its purchasing power due to the continuous expansion of the money supply.
85%.
That's rough.
But what makes Riker's argument unique is that he doesn't just frame this as bad monetary policy or reckless inflation. He frames it as societal emasculation.
Right. He uses a very visceral, everyday metric for this.
The steak dinner.
Yeah. He points out that the price of a prime steak dinner in 1971 now equals the exact same cost of a soy latte today.
Had a very specific comparison.
Very deliberate. He is explicitly linking the mathematical debasement of the currency directly to a perceived physical and cultural softening of the society that uses it.
The money got weak, so the people got weak.
Exactly. And he points to extreme real-world historical examples to illustrate the ultimate consequence of this system.
Like what happens when the illusion of fiat currency completely collapses. Right. He spends a significant amount of time analyzing Argentina. He breaks down the mechanics of the 2001 Corralito crisis.
Which is just a terrifying piece of history.
It really is. For the listener who doesn't know, during the Corralito, the Argentine government essentially woke up one day and froze everyone's bank accounts.
Yeah, you literally could not go to the ATM and withdraw your own money.
Because the government was trying to stop a run on the banks as their currency just completely collapsed.
Yes. The government restricted cash withdrawals to a tiny fraction of what people actually needed to survive. Metal shutters came down over bank windows.
People were banging on the doors.
Right, suddenly realizing that the digital numbers on their bank statements were entirely fictional.
Just pixels on a screen.
Exactly. And then Riker fast forwards to Argentina's 2021 diaper riots, fueled by inflation hitting 300%.
300%.
Yeah, and he uses this to create an incredibly stark contrast. On one hand, you have government bureaucrats hoarding institutional power and printing entirely worthless paper money. But on the other hand, out in the countryside, you have real men gauchos completely ignoring the banking system and trading actual physical cattle for physical US dollars.
It's the ultimate reversion to hard reality.
It is.
And he draws this massive analogy between that and the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation in Germany during the 1920s.
Oh, the wheelbarrows of cash.
Right. He describes the psychological horror of a scenario where German men who had worked their entire lives were forced to barter their heirloom family pocket watches just to buy a single loaf of bread to feed their kids.
While the state was simultaneously subsidizing completely frivolous things like finger painting workshops.
Yeah, the contrast is just brutal. But where this gets really interesting is how he connects that historical humiliation to the modern convenience of digital banking.
Yes, this is a crucial pivot in his argument. He examines the modern push toward a cashless society.
Right. He cites Federal Reserve's data showing that cashless systems using credit cards, Apple Pay, Venmo actually spike impulse spending by 22%.
He calls this phenomenon a pink-taxed financial infantilization.
So what's the actual mechanism he is describing here?
It's the removal of friction. Think about it. When you pay for a meal with a crisp $100 bill, there is a psychological weight to that transaction.
Right, you physically feel the resources leaving your possession.
Exactly. But when you simply tap a piece of plastic or look at your phone to authorize a payment, that friction is entirely abstracted away.
It doesn't feel like real money.
Riker argues that this abstraction removes the gravity of spending real resources, encouraging emotional, impulsive consumption rather than disciplined resource management.
Okay, so if the Fed is a rigged game, and digital fiat currency is designed to infantilize us and steal our wealth through inflation, what is his solution?
His alternative is a concept he terms monetary masculinity.
Monetary masculinity, got it.
For Riker, the only escape from this systemic matrix of debased, feminized fiat currency is a radical return to hard assets.
Yeah.
This means physical gold and decentralized Bitcoin.
And he is very specific about this. He doesn't say buy a gold ETF. He says buy physical crude rands.
Tangible gold coins.
Right, and hold them in your own physical possession. Bury them in your yard if you have to.
Yes, tangible, mathematically scarce assets that cannot be printed by a committee. And he leans incredibly heavily into cryptocurrency as well.
Which makes sense for his argument.
He specifically cites Coinbase data that reveals 94% of all crypto traders are male.
That is a staggering demographic statistic. 94%.
It is, and Riker uses it to heavily reinforce his biological thesis. The mainstream media often frames high-risk crypto trading as degenerate, foolish gambling, right?
Oh, definitely.
Well, Riker entirely rejects that premise. He frames it instead as a biological imperative.
How so?
He argues that men are evolutionarily hardwired to hunt for asymmetric returns, situations where the downside is capped, but the upside potential is massive and life-changing.
Let me make sure I'm grasping his analogy here. He literally compares a guy in his basement trading highly volatile altcoins to his ancient ancestors hunting woolly mammoths on the tundra.
That is the exact parallel he draws. Hunting a mammoth carries an extreme risk of death, but the payoff is feeding the tribe for a month. Trading volatile crypto carries extreme financial risk, but the payoff is escaping the fiat system entirely.
I see the connection he's making.
Right. In Riker's view, Bitcoin isn't just digital money or some tech novelty. It's specifically how the state interacts with the family through taxation and welfare.
Yes, and this is undoubtedly where Riker's thesis becomes its most controversial and sociologically provocative.
He actively reinterprets the entire concept of the social safety net, framing it as an intentional, calculated mechanism of male subjugation.
He unpacks this heavily in Chapter 4. He states, without any sugarcoating, that welfare and progressive taxation are explicitly designed to neuter male ambition.
And he brings receipts.
He really does. He cites a 2018 National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER, data point, claiming that every single dollar spent on social welfare reduces the male labor supply by 0.6 hours weekly.
Right.
He looks at that exact mechanic and says, that's not an abstract sociological theory, that's quantifiable mathematical emasculation.
To illustrate the deep psychological impact of this, Riker uses a fascinating, albeit incredibly dark, historical comparison.
Oh, the Soviet Russia stuff?
Yes, he looks at the agricultural and social policies of 1930s Soviet Russia under Jason Stalin.
The communal kitchens, right. This blew my mind.
Yeah. When the Soviet state decided to collectivize daily living, one of their initiatives was to replace private family kitchens with massive, state-run communal cooking halls.
And the pitch was that this would be great, right?
Right. The propaganda from efficiency experts promised that this would free women from domestic labor and give everyone more leisure time.
But that's not what happened.
No. According to the historical archives Riker cites, this policy had a catastrophic side effect on the men. Male alcoholism rates essentially doubled.
And his reasoning for why is just so specific is because they took away his cast iron skillet.
Federally, yes.
He argues that when you remove a man's physical ability to sear a steak in his own pan, in his own home, to physically provide a hot meal for his specific family, you entirely strip him of his primal foundational role.
Exactly. The psychological mechanism is that providing food is the most basic act of masculine utility.
Right.
When the state takes over that role, the man loses his purpose and despair sets in. But the flip side of that historical Soviet example is what happened with actual agriculture.
The private plots.
Yes, collectivized state farms were a disaster, leading to mass starvation. But when Stalin finally relented and allowed citizens to maintain tiny private farming plots, representing just 4% of the total arable land of the country, those tiny private plots ended up producing a staggering 25% of the Soviet nation's entire food supply.
25% of the food from 4% of the land.
Because they were working for their own survival, not the state's quota.
Okay, so help me unpack the specific terminology he uses for this concept. He calls it the castration effect. How does he define that formulaically? Like, what is the actual mechanic?
Riker defines the castration effect with a very simple psychological formula. Shared responsibility equals no responsibility.
Okay.
He argues that when the state steps in to act as the universal, omnipresent provider, when a government subsidizes housing, offers universal baseline childcare, or promises free college for everyone, it effectively strips the individual man of his primal evolutionary role as the sole provider and protector.
By doing it for him.
Right. By socializing the burden of survival, the state essentially becomes, in Riker's exact words, everyone's husband and nobody's father.
Wow.
He believes fundamentally that a man will only innovate, endure extreme hardship, and labor intensely if his family survival rests entirely and exclusively on his shoulders.
If you remove that existential life or death pressure by providing a government safety net, the male ambition simply collapses.
That is his core argument, yes.
And he applies this exact same logic to the tax code. He brings up this classic American archetype, the 1955 steelworker who could easily support a wife, buy a home, and raise 3 kids on a single income while paying just 11% in federal taxes.
Right.
And Riker contrasts him with his modern grandson, who might be paying 24% or more for the exact same relative income, struggling to afford rent, and dealing with an army of IRS agents monitoring his bank account.
It's a stark contrast.
It is, but wait, let me push back on Riker's logic here for a second, because this feels like a massive contradiction to me.
Okay, let's hear it.
Riker is highly praising the 1955 traditional family structure, right? The husband provides, the wife manages the home.
Yes.
But elsewhere in the book, he fiercely warns young men against ever getting married, specifically citing modern divorce courts as a trap.
He does.
So how does he reconcile this? How can you advocate for a traditional family while telling men to avoid the institution that creates it?
It does seem deeply contradictory on the surface, But there is a very specific mechanical nuance to his worldview regarding the state's involvement in relationships.
Okay.
Riker is highly supportive of the traditional marriage model, but only as a private partnership where the state is completely absent.
I see.
He views the unpaid domestic labor of a traditional wife not as subjugation, but as a massive, untaxable economic advantage for a man.
Oh, right. He uses that modern TikTok example to prove this.
The trad wife.
Yeah, he talks about Hannah, the viral TikTok trad wife, who essentially funds her husband's entire construction business by selling homemade sourdough bread from her kitchen and managing the household overhead for free.
And Riker literally calls her the ultimate tax shelter.
Precisely. In that specific traditional framework, the family unit operates as a closed, sovereign, highly efficient economic engine that the government cannot easily tax or regulate.
But what Riker vehemently and aggressively attacks is the modern, state-mediated legal institution of marriage.
And more specifically, the family court system.
Right. He views the modern divorce court not as a system of equitable division, but as a punitive apparatus of the state, designed specifically to extract wealth from productive men.
He notes the statistic that 97% of all alimony payers are men.
Yes, and he describes the mechanism of alimony not as reasonable spousal support, but as a state-mandated marital stimulus package.
That phrasing is wild.
He argues that family courts essentially forced the liquidation of a man's hard-earned, tangible assets to fund the broader consumer economy, whether that wealth goes toward his ex-wife's new lifestyle, her new partner, or just into the pockets of divorce lawyers.
So in Riker's eyes, the state has weaponized the legal contract of marriage to effectively legalize theft from the male producer class.
So to answer your question, he loves the concept of traditional partnership, but he entirely despises the legal contract of modern marriage because it invites the state into the home.
Which brings us to the psychology of the modern retail investor.
Right.
If you are a young man listening to this and you believe that the state, the family courts, and the fiat money system are all completely rigged against you ever achieving this traditional masculine ideal of being a provider.
How does that anxiety spill over into how you manage your own money?
Exactly. How do you invest when you think the game is rigged?
Well, this takes us into a section of the book that is highly entertaining, incredibly aggressive, and focuses on market psychology, beta males, market bubbles, and the economics of war.
He certainly pulls absolutely no punches when diagnosing the manic psychology of modern markets.
Not at all.
He draws this hilarious and brutal comparison.
Yeah.
He looks at the 17th century Dutch tulip mania, where wealthy aristocrats were literally mortgaging their generational estates to buy rare flower bulbs because the hype was so out of control.
It's just utter madness.
And he compared that to modern beta males buying NFTs during the crypto boom. You know, guys spending $85,000 on an audio file of a fart, or buying digital pictures of cartoon apes hoping to get rich quick.
Right.
He contrasts that pathetic, baseless speculation with what he calls the chaotic, meme-fueled alpha warfare of the 2021 GameStop short squeeze.
The GameStop phenomenon is absolutely central to his thesis on modern retail trading. It perfectly encapsulates his idea of financial rebellion.
It really does.
Riker looks at the Reddit users on boards like Wall Street Bets, specifically highlighting the user Deep Fucking Value, who famously turned a $53,000 position into nearly $48 million.
Unbelievable.
And Riker doesn't look at that and see a lucky financial anomaly or a market glitch. He sees it as primal, asymmetrical warfare enacted against institutional hedge funds.
He claims his backtesting data showed that a swarm of anonymous retail traders posting crude memes on 4chan actually had a 22% higher ROI than elite Ivy League hedge fund managers during that specific period.
Which is just crazy.
It is, but let's actually explain the mechanism of a short squeeze for the listener, because it's vital to understanding why Riker views this as an act of war, not just investing.
Yeah, break it down.
Imagine a hedge fund borrows a stock, say GameStop, and immediately sells it, betting that the price will go down. Their plan is to buy it back later at a cheaper price, return the borrowed stock, and pocket the difference.
Right, that's a standard short.
But what Wall Street Bets did was coordinate to buy up all the available stock, driving the price sky high.
That's a squeeze.
Exactly. The hedge funds had to buy the stock back to return it, but there was none left to buy, forcing them to pay astronomical prices. They were trapped.
The retail guys literally weaponized the hedge fund's own greed against them and bled them dry.
Exactly. It was a mechanical trap. And Riker argues they were able to hold the line and execute this trap because they were entirely immune to the mainstream media narratives.
While CNBC anchors were screaming at them to sell and take profits, The retail traders held on.
Right. Rucker argues that modern investors are generally manipulated by this kind of media fear-mongering because they lack what he calls Spartan compounding.
They panic when things get volatile.
Yes, and to fix this, he advocates for radical physiological conditioning. He literally suggests that men should replace their morning coffee with ice baths.
Ice baths.
Yeah. He cites a physiological study showing that extreme cold exposure spikes norepinephrine by 530%, which happens to be the exact same chemical neuropathway that Navy SEALs utilize to manage extreme fear in combat.
Oh, wow.
Riker wants day traders to physically suppress their cortisol production so they don't panic sell when the market inevitably dips.
He is basically advocating for physiological conditioning to survive financial volatility.
Right.
But what is truly astonishing is how he ties this concept of risk aversion back to the family dynamic, using this deeply revealing historical anecdote from the 1929 stock market crash.
Yes, this part blew my mind. He claims that in 1929, in the days right before Black Tuesday, when the market completely cratered, wives allegedly swarmed the trading floors and brokerage houses.
Physically demanding their husbands sell off their stock holdings.
Right, to protect the family from the volatility.
And Riker uses this historical anecdote to argue that the state of marriage inherently and permanently corrupts a man's risk calculus.
How so?
He proposes that the men who capitulated to their wives' emotional demands for safety were entirely wiped out in the ensuing crash, while those who held firm and acted on pure market data survived.
Interesting.
And he connects this historical theory to modern Federal Reserve data, suggesting that married men's investment portfolios grow 17% slower than their single counterparts.
17% slower.
Right. The mechanical conclusion he draws is that matrimony forces men into a state of emotional appeasement, replacing cold, Darwinian mathematical market logic with an overriding demand for domestic safety.
So he takes that exact same concept on individual risk aversion versus aggressive risk taking and scales it all the way up to the national and geopolitical level.
He does.
He makes the argument that long periods of peace actually make a nation weak, and that war, the threat of actual violence, is quite literally economic Viagra.
It's an incredibly provocative stance, but it follows his underlying logic perfectly.
Right.
Riker fundamentally believes that conflict and the existential threat of total destruction are the only true catalysts capable of driving monumental technological and economic leaps.
Comfort breeds stagnation, terror breeds innovation.
Exactly.
He brings up General George S. Patton's famous quote about how fixed fortifications are monuments to human stupidity.
Oh, yeah.
He points out that the internet itself, ARPANET, was originally a Cold War military project designed to ensure communications could survive a nuclear strike.
And GPS as well.
Right. GPS, which we use every day to find a coffee shop, was originally a $12 billion Pentagon initiative designed strictly to drop nuclear payloads with pinpoint accuracy.
He is arguing that we only get these massive leaps in everyday technology when the military-industrial complex is forced into action by a genuine threat.
Right, he is highlighting the massive mechanical economic stimulus provided by the defense supply chain.
The math he uses here is stark and just undeniable.
Very stark. He points out that building just one single Lockheed Martin F-35 fighter jet requires 300,000 individual components.
300,000.
And those components are sourced from 1,700 different suppliers spread across the country, which ultimately creates 1.2 million high-paying, highly technical paychecks.
And then he compares that massive industrial web to a local vegan cafe employing 4 baristas and says, if you want a strong economy, I'll take the fighter jet.
It's a brutal comparison.
It is. Riker's ultimate overarching conclusion in this section is that peace talks, climate activism, and diplomatic de-escalation actually make the stock market nervous.
But the threat of war makes it boom.
Exactly. He argues the looming threat of mutually assured destruction during the Cold War actually birthed the longest, most robust bull market in human history.
He really leans heavily into that popular cyclical theory, right? Weak men create hard times create hard men.
He does. For Riker, a system must be pushed to the absolute brink of destruction to burn off the bureaucratic deadwood and experience true, virile, world-changing growth.
So if conflict, existential stakes, and brutal efficiency are what drive real, tangible value, that ruthless, profit-driven worldview is naturally going to put Riker at total odds with the modern corporate obsession with social justice, sustainability, and, feelings.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to a massive clash of ideologies: woke boards, climate Lysenkoism, and what he calls the moksha margin.
In this section, Riker takes his previous critique of ESG, environmental, social, and governance metrics, and elevates it from a mere business complaint to a sweeping indictment of modern Western corporate philosophy.
He outright claims that ESG doesn't stand for environmental, social, governance at all. He says the real acronym is slowly killing growth.
And he doesn't just say this. He points to a Harvard Business Review study that allegedly shows high ESG compliant companies perform 12% worse annually than their non-compliant, purely profit-driven peers.
12% is a lot of money when you're talking about Fortune 500 companies.
The mechanism he describes here is essentially extortion. He views ESG compliance as a modern protection racket,
Like the mafia.
or he compares it to medieval lords demanding tribute payments from peasants to avoid being attacked. Only now it's multinational corporations paying the woke Vatican, consulting firms, and ratings agencies for social credit scores just to avoid being canceled.
Right. And he offers what he bluntly calls go broke or go based corporate math. He juxtaposes two massive entities to prove his point.
Okay.
First, Disney, claiming they lost $90 billion in market cap because they diverted their focus from creating great stories to inserting woke rhetoric and political messaging into their products.
They're the contrast.
He contrasts that massive loss against ExxonMobil. He notes that Exxon essentially ignored the climate theatrics, refused to apologize for their business model, drilled harder, and subsequently posted a record-breaking $56 billion profit in 2022.
And to explain exactly why this divergence in performance happens, Riker introduces a philosophical and cultural framework he calls the moksha margin.
The moksha margin.
Right. He contrasts the foundational corporate cultures of different Asian economies to prove a sweeping point about the dangers of spiritual and ethical focus versus raw, unbridled ambition.
He heavily critiques Buddhist or Zen-inspired corporate practices, doesn't he?
He does. For instance, he mocks a former Sony CEO who implemented practices like halting corporate meetings for periods of group meditation, or the nation of Thailand enshrining a philosophy of a sufficiency economy that actively moderates greed and preaches contentment.
Right, and he looks at that Zen approach and compares it directly to the aggressive, hyper-competitive Confucianism found in South Korea. And the metric he uses is innovation, pointing out that South Korea files a staggering 4.7 patents per 1,000 people, aggressively pushing technology forward compared to Thailand's 0.3 patents.
Exactly. The core of his moksha margin theory is that spiritual moderation, mindfulness, and prioritizing emotional harmony mechanically breed economic mediocrity.
He believes that free markets do not reward spiritual enlightenment. They demand merciless, concrete, forward-moving action.
That's his view.
Okay, that makes sense from a cutthroat capitalist perspective, but I want to push on his attack on climate activism because he takes a very strange angle here.
He does.
He labels modern climate activism as the new Lysenkoism. For the listener, Trofim Lysenko was a Soviet pseudoscientist who rejected actual genetics and forced bizarre agricultural policies that literally caused mass famines.
Right.
Raker points out that atmospheric CO2 currently sits at roughly 420 parts per million, which he notes actually matches the atmospheric conditions of the Jurassic era.
A time when plant life flourished massively across the globe.
Exactly. He even jokes that maybe humans are the invasive species, not the carbon. But here's where I get lost. How does he tie environmentalism and climate policy back to his core theme? How is worrying about the ozone layer connected to his perceived war on men?
It's a very specific structural connection. Riker views global climate policies not as genuine environmental stewardship, but as a disguised systemic wealth transfer.
Okay.
Crucially, he sees the mechanics of this wealth transfer as deliberately designed to penalize and dismantle masculine physical industries.
You mean industries like farming, long-haul trucking, oil drilling, the roughnecks, the guys doing the physical labor of running the world?
Yes, exactly. He points out the deep hypocrisy of the elites pushing for climate austerity, citing figures like Al Gore living in massive, energy-guzzling mansions who live incredibly comfortably, while simultaneously demanding that blue-collar workers in the energy sector sacrifice their livelihoods to meet carbon goals.
Right, the hypocrisy.
But the absolute linchpin of his argument here is a specific financial statistic claiming the European Union devoted 12.6 billion euros from carbon taxes, taxes levied on physical industry. and used that money to specifically fund gender studies programs across European universities.
Wow. If that's true, that is an incredible mechanism of transfer.
In Riker's worldview, this is the ultimate final insult. The intense, physical, dangerous labor of blue-collar men in the energy and transportation sectors is being heavily taxed under the guise of saving the planet.
And those exact funds are being directly, systematically siphoned into elite academic institutions.
Right, to fund ideological attacks on the very concept of traditional masculinity. It is, to him, a self-cannibalizing system where the builders of society are being forced, at gunpoint by the tax code, to finance their own cultural erasure.
Okay, so if we zoom out for a second and look at the whole picture, Riker has systematically described a massive, deeply hostile capture of almost every major institution in Western society.
The Federal Reserve, the European Union, the family courts, corporate boardrooms, academia.
All of it. The picture he paints is incredibly bleak, almost dystopian for his target audience. If you believe him, you are surrounded on all sides.
You really are.
The ultimate question is, what is Riker's playbook? What does he actually tell these men to do to survive and fight back?
Well, let's dive into the final section. Escaping the system, the playbook for sovereignty.
Because Riker is not a doomer, right? He does not leave his readers without a
He
plan.
definitely provides a highly actionable, if entirely unconventional, anti-woke playbook.
And the overarching theme of this playbook is starving the grifters. On a corporate macro level, he advocates for actively boycotting massive asset management firms like BlackRock.
And deliberately shorting ESG heavy funds in the market.
Right. He demands that any company hoping to survive must immediately replace their DEI officers with what he calls profit mercenaries, people whose only metric is revenue.
But his advice is most potent and heavily weighted toward individual personal sovereignty. Riker wants his readers to mechanically detach themselves from the vulnerable, trackable nodes of the traditional system.
Financially, he explains exactly how to do this. It means buying physical gold again, he mentions Krugerrands specifically, and holding it yourself outside of a bank vault.
And it means taking your cryptocurrency off of centralized exchanges like Coinbase.
Right, putting it onto physical cold storage hardware wallets where no government can freeze it.
Exactly. And legally, he suggests utilizing offshore Panama asset protection trusts.
Oh, yeah.
He explains the mechanics of these trusts, showing how they can legally shield your accumulated wealth from what he sees as the predatory wealth-extracting machinery of the divorce courts.
He also extends this concept of radical sovereignty into the realm of family and education.
He urges his readers to pull their children out of the progressive public education system entirely.
He advocates for a return to rigorous private homeschooling focused entirely on hard STEM skills, mathematics, and classical history.
To build what he terms a generation of future kings, completely insulated from modern state ideology.
And he sees a massive cultural shift happening right now that proves his theories can work in the real world. He points directly to Elon Musk's hostile takeover of Twitter as a prime, undeniable example.
Right. Riker calls Musk firing 80% of the company's DEI and HR staff a masterclass in replacing whining with winning.
He notes the mechanics of what happened next. Despite all the media hand-wringing and predictions that the site would crash, user engagement on the platform actually spiked 17% in the 6 months after the purge.
The engineering got leaner, the product got faster.
He sees this as absolute proof that the free market always rewards virility and competence over vulnerability and consensus.
And this connects perfectly to Riker's final views on the evolution of digital media and the mechanics of information distribution.
Yeah, he makes a huge, sweeping historical comparison here. He compares modern independent publishing platforms, specifically like Substack, to Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in the 15th century.
It's a very apt historical parallel for his argument. Just as the mechanical printing press broke the absolute monopoly that medieval monks and the church had on knowledge and scripture, allowing ideas to spread virally, Riker argues that platforms like Substack allow independent creators to completely bypass the corporate media apparatus.
And bypass its enforcement mechanism of cancel culture.
Exactly. He cites a Cato Institute finding that 80% of canceled voices in recent years were men.
Right, and he praises this new digital economy. An economy where creators can completely ignore the institutional outrage, speak directly and unfiltered to their audience, and build alternative, highly lucrative, uncensorable economies.
It is genuinely a marvel to look at the comprehensive, sweeping nature of Riker's worldview.
I mean, just looking back at everything we've covered today, he seamlessly, or at least incredibly forcefully, connects the protective bylaws of medieval merchant guilds, the agricultural failures of Soviet history, the mechanics of modern central bank monetary policy, the endocrinology of testosterone spikes, and the supply chain math of fighter jets into this singular, highly aggressive manifesto.
It is a complete, holistic playbook for tearing down the current corporate and social structure.
And rebuilding what he envisions as traditional patriarchal capitalism.
It is a sweeping, audacious synthesis of history, economics, and biology, all filtered through a very specific, uncompromising ideological lens.
So, to summarize Riker's core message to you, the reader, he believes the world is, at its base level, a brutal, unforgiving Darwinian arena.
Survival in this arena requires completely rejecting the soft tyranny of modern HR-driven institutions.
It requires buying and holding hard, tangible, mathematically scarce assets.
And above all, it requires a return to relentless, unapologetic building, competing, and winning.
And I think it is important to reinforce here at the end that regardless of where you, the listener, stand on the political spectrum.
Whether you find his arguments deeply compelling or whether you find them utterly abhorrent.
Right. Riker's book provides a stark, completely unfiltered look into the mechanics of a rapidly growing counterculture.
This is a massive demographic that views modern financial, social, and corporate systems not as the progressive evolutions of a maturing society, but as literal existential threats to the foundations of civilization itself.
Understanding the mechanics of this perspective is absolutely crucial for understanding the current cultural and economic divide we are living through.
Absolutely.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to toss it over to my co-host who had a really profound thought about a contradiction hidden deep within Riker's love of technology.
Yes, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Let's hear it.
Throughout the entirety of the book, Riker heaps praise on the military-industrial complex and the relentless, obsessive, hyper-focused engineers who built things like ARPANET and the foundations of modern digital infrastructure. He deeply loves that hyper-masculine wartime urgency that birthed the digital age. But isn't it a massive, perhaps tragic, ironic paradox that these very technologies, the internet, smartphones, social media algorithms, frictionless digital banking born of that wartime urgency he praises, have created the exact digital, screen-addicted, hyper-socialized, cashless modern world that he now believes is fundamentally destroying traditional masculinity?
Wow.
It raises a profound question. Can you build a digital empire without eventually becoming a digital serf? It is the ultimate paradox of his entire worldview.
That is an incredible point to end on. You build the ultimate tool, and the tool ultimately pacifies you. It's definitely something for all of us to think about.
It really is.
Well, that brings us to the end of our journey today. I want to remind you that this deep dive was custom crafted just for you to give you the most important nuggets of insight from this massive, highly complex text.
If you enjoyed this level of depth and detail, please take a second right now to like and subscribe to the show.
And if this conversation sparked your curiosity or made you angry, and you want to read Conrad Riker's unfiltered arguments and verify his data for yourself, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Business Cycles, a deep dive into economic ups and downs.
And don't forget to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his writings.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.